All right, so again, welcome. If anyone just joined us, please make sure you write your name, where you're from, and how you heard about the program in the chat box. And if you do not have access to the handouts I posted on Moodle, then go ahead and write your email address, and I'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of those. Okay, again, my name is Lisa Terry, and I'm a student with the Fielding Graduate University, and I just started in the summer. And again, if you want to tweet, here are the hashtags, hashtag Y0 to 5 and hashtag child development. And this conference is going to be posted on Fielding's YouTube channel, and so you'll have access to this. I will send the PowerPoint out so you guys don't have to feel like you have to write this down, but I'll make sure that everybody that's joining today also has access to the PowerPoint, as long as I have your email. And again, I apologize for my voice. I'm just getting over strep, so I've lost my voice in and out. So I just drank some tea, so I'm probably going to get hot, but hopefully it'll be okay. Okay, so functional assessment. So we're going to talk about moving beyond the checklist. And I just started my own website. It's called empowerfoundations.com. Feel free to check it out. I'm going to start blogging on there. I think there's one blog on there, but I put some of my favorite resources on there. If I have any kind of upcoming trainings or anything like that, that will also be posted there. Okay, so these are our course objectives for today. We're going to look at the purpose and the definition of functional assessment. We're going to look at some of the evidence-based practices related to that, really centered probably more around early intervention. We're going to look at assessment, and then we're going to kind of bring it all together. So really, how do we explain it to families and the intervention? And again, email me at lisaterry@email.fielding.edu if you need copies of the handouts. And if you guys can all just make sure you're muted, just so there isn't the echo in the background. Thank you. Okay. And so we're going to utilize the chat box today. And if you guys have any questions, you can also raise your hand, but I'll kind of keep a monitor in the chat box to look at it there too. Okay. So what is our purpose of assessment? And I feel like assessments really come such a long way from, I don't know, just back in the day and how people looked at kids, but really what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at each individual child's strengths and their weaknesses and figure out how we're going to build upon that during intervention. And so, so this is really important. I think individualized is something that I'm pretty a big advocate for. And so you'll always hear me say that I want to make sure that we're individualizing services for each child, because I feel strongly that each child really is different. They have different family components, and so I'll always remain in the framework of family-centered services as well. And I really like this quote: going back to the basics strengthens your foundation. And I just think that's so important, to really dig in deep and get that rich information from families. And so that's really where this functional assessment comes into play. So what is functional assessment? So this is kind of like my definition of where I've kind of seen it from just training here in the field and what we've been trying to accomplish. But it's really a combination of parent report, observation, protocols, so some kind of foundational tool that we're using, clinical opinion, and or any other information to gain a good comprehensive understanding of a child's, again, individualized strengths and weaknesses within their everyday routines and activities across multiple situations and settings. And I think that you guys will start to hear about functional assessment more. It's really becoming something all over the country that I think early intervention is really moving towards. So hopefully this will kind of be a good start for you, unless you've already heard about it. And again, if you're just joining us, welcome, and just type your name, where you're from, and how you heard about this program or this conference in the chat box, please. Okay, so So let's just kind of break down the data sources. So when we're looking at parent report, this is really important because I feel like assessment, before we used to focus so much just on the child. And so we only got that little snippet of that child before. And so parent report is really going to help give us that information, but it's not just asking the parent those yes or no questions. We're really going to dig in deeper to get some good information from them. And then some kind of developmental assessment tool. Usually everybody has to use some kind of protocol. So we want to make sure that we're using that as a foundation to get our developmental scores or ranges, which is always important for insurance purposes. And observation. Observation is so critical, just to really stand back and see how the child does something without interfering, how the parents interacting with them. And I think, for me, observation's been one of the hardest things to do because you have to just get used to the silence and being okay with it and kind of, making sure parents are okay. We're just going to kind of wait and see. And any kind of medical reports, any other outside reports that are generated, and clinical opinion. That's going to be another big thing because we're all in this field. We've studied it. We're considered the experts. And so really got to start trusting our own expertise, especially when it comes to assessment. So what is functional assessment and what is it not? So functional assessment is really centered around a child's routines and activities. And it's, not just based off what we're seeing during testing. And so we're not really sticking with those discrete skills. We're really going to center everything around the child's favorite activities, the routines that are really important for that family. It is also open-ended based off of the caregiver's responses. So our questions, I can give you a great framework for questions to kind of talk to families, and you'll see that in the handouts given. But really, you're going to move back and forth from that framework because you're going to go based off of whatever the parent tells you. And that's really important because every child's so different and all the family dynamics are different that it's good to, find out more on your own, based off of your clinical opinion. So that's where you're going to use your clinical opinion to determine what you want to know more about. So it's not going to be just a list of yes or no answers. When I first started looking at assessments in the field, people would generally just take their protocols out and just go down the protocols and ask parents, is Johnny doing this? Is Johnny doing that? Well, what about this? What about that? And so it was just a lot of those yes and no questions. And really that's kind of hard because every time a parent would say no, then they're like, are we getting that wrong? Is that the right answer? And so we really want to back off of that to help give them, better relationships that we're building with them because we're working with them with their child, and we know that they're with the child most of the time, so they're the experts, and so we want to make sure that relationships built. Excuse me again for my voice, I'm just getting over the strep. Okay, and we're also evaluating the child in relation to others, so we're really looking at their relationships with other people because that's really important to the responses that they have in their environment. And we're not just only evaluating the child. So we're not just strictly looking at the child and their skills and what they're capable of doing. We really need to open that up and see what's around them that's affecting their development. How many other opportunities do they have around them? It's ongoing, so it's not a one-stop shop. This is going to be something that's continuous. So it's something you're continuously doing to find out. And it's fostering warmth and empathy. And so it's not something that's intimidating to parents. A lot of times, you see parents come in with concerns with their child and, they're not really sure what's going to happen. They're already feeling like it's their fault. I heard one dad say, it took them a while to even get into the program because, excuse me, because they felt like it was their fault. And so they didn't want to have to admit that fault, in a way. And so, we want to make sure that we're listening to them, that we're not intimidating them. We're not making them feel like, they aren't doing a great job. And so, again, that relationship building is really important. So what does it look like? So this is just in the house. We did a few mock assessments a while back. That's my son, Benjamin. He's 5 years old today. So we're getting ready to have his party later, but he's out shopping and having fun with his dad right now. So he's a lot older, but this is just, you know, I was pretending like I was a parent, and, you know, and we had a service coordinator and 2 other disciplines in the home. So this is all centered around early intervention. And if anybody doesn't know what early intervention is, can you just type it in the box and I can make sure that I explain that for you. Excuse me. So what does it look like? That's really always the biggest question. But typically with my team, so you generally have 2 disciplines, whether it's a speech therapist, an educator, occupational therapist, a physical therapist. And so you have those 2 disciplines that are really doing the testing and asking those questions, and the service coordinator as well. And so I generally like for one person to focus on the questions, one person to focus on working with the child. And so you're kind of listening and hearing and doing all of it at the same time, but you're really working as a team and you're trusting your team. And that's kind of the importance of everyone becoming more global interventionists, where we're not just focused in looking at one discipline or one thing. We want to look at the whole child. And so we really need to make sure that we're well versed in child development overall. And we're going to incorporate any protocols into the questions that are realistic, that are realistically unobservable. I think you can probably take we use an early learning accomplishment profile here, but I think you could take almost any kind of protocol, especially if it's a criterion reference protocol, and you know, figure out what's related, what's not related, and how you can join that into the questions, because you're going to want to observe the child, but you're also going to want to find out how does that go for the family when they're in other situations. So when they're at the park, when, you know, they're at the grocery store. So we're really getting a good outlook from the parent side too, and then the parents can tell us whether or not that's a concern for them. Again, it's going to be individualized, so individualization is really key. So this information gathered, it's going to be unique for each child, and that includes twins. I do a lot of audits, and I've seen a lot of twins and their plans were so similar that you could tell that there wasn't a really good separation of each child and their strengths and their weaknesses. So really making sure that we're looking at each individual child and not just children in general. And then we want to make sure that we respect the culture. We respect culture. And that's getting explored through the process. And it sounds like everybody's from all over. And so there's a lot of cultural diversity. But I generally, if I ever encounter families and I feel like there's other culture things going on, I just ask them about it. And, you know, I'm just tell them, you know, like, how does that work for you guys? What is it? What is your preference? And really gain a good understanding for them and from their point of view. And again, we want to focus away from discrete skills. So we're not just worried about whether or not the child's stacking blocks. We're not just worried about creating a huge word list for them. We really want to know what does that look like. Excuse me. And I'm going to show you a short video. And it goes by really, really fast because I just kind of took snippets of the video. And it's really, it might be a little loud, I'm not sure. So we'll figure it out. But hopefully everyone can hear it. But just kind of look at it, and I want you to pick out some things you liked, some things you didn't like, some things that you kind of noticed, which you didn't notice about how the parents interacting, and you'll see me in there. I was a parent. And then how the child's interacting, and also how the team's interacting. So go ahead and take note, and then if you see anything that you like or don't like, or you know, want to respond, then go ahead and type it in the chat box.
What does that look like for things? I noticed when he didn't want me to put the other things away, he said,
yeah, she was able to like heat up like chicken nuggets, but she did it in the microwave, so it was a little bit softer, and he actually ate it. But I tried it here, and he hasn't eaten it for me at all.
This looks well loved in the nest.
I know. I tried to write it.
Yeah, he's right. You're gonna like it, right? I'm gonna eat up the tomato. I ate it up. Should we turn the page? Ready? I'm ready. Let's turn the page.
Find a new picture.
Yay! pasty about that.
Yeah.
And he kind of wants to turn it, so I just want to kind of feel. You made it go fast a little bit.
Okay. So I am going to sorry, I'm just seeing how many people we have here, and that'll determine whether or not we need to use the chat. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Okay, so tell me, what did you guys see? And you can just unmute yourself. You don't have to do the video if you don't want to, but what did you see in that video that you liked, that you didn't like? How did you see some of the things that they were looking for, and just some of the interaction styles? And you can type in the chat too if that's easier. But like one thing, like just Benjamin, I can't believe he's 5 now, but just Benjamin's proximity to me and some of the things that they were trying to get him to do. And he's never met them before either, so it was like a regular team coming in. Anybody? Anybody notice anything? One of the things that we kind of look for is, you know, incorporating those questions while we're looking at things with him. So when he was laying down on the ground, you know, too, we're really looking to see if he's crossing midline. We're looking at his reach, and because he was a huge W sitter too, we wanted to make sure that he had a strong core too, and so they kind of looked at some of that stuff. Yep, Angie said she liked the belly activity and reaching for the puzzle pieces. Yep, and I think we see a lot too when people do puzzles. They just sit down and give them the puzzles and present it in front of them, and you know, you can do lots of different things with puzzles too. Janelle said that she loved that my other children were there too, and he was close to me, but he still participated actively. Yeah, that was really neat. And I don't think you got to see like all the snippets, but there was some too, and my daughter was answering some of the questions as well, and she was trying to get him to engage and do some of the activities. And so I love using siblings during assessments. I think sometimes the child feels a little bit more comfortable when their siblings are doing something. Anything else? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen again. Okay. All right. So that's just a little snippet of what it looks like. And Angie said, if he never met them before, it's good that he was able to be next to me and then go to the page. Exactly, yeah, and that kind of took him some warming up to do. And if you know my son, he's a super, super shy kid. So that was really nice that he was able to warm up. And I think, too, one thing when you're going into assessments, you want to make sure that you give the child that time to warm up. Sometimes it takes some kids up to an hour for us to even be in their home before we really start to see their personality start to come out. But now we're going to look at some of the questions. So what questions could we ask to find out how a child is functioning? And so I always like to start off with, tell me about your day. It really sets a tone with parents. I always explain why I'm doing this, why it's important that I'm asking about their day and their routines and their activities, and how development's really intertwined in multiple ways. And so I ask, how does Johnny let you know he's awake? I might say, where does he sleep? Find out if they're sleeping in a bed. Are they sleeping in parents' bed? Are they sleeping in a crib still? Just kind of, what does that look like? What happens when it's time for bed? So I'm trying to get some kind of bedtime routine idea. If they have one, if they don't have one, if the child just, you know, falls asleep in their room, if they watch TV until they fall asleep, because all of that's important in child development, right? Especially screen time before bed, because we know that they might not be getting good sound sleep through the night. So it's important that we find that information out. How does he sleep through the night? Are they waking up? We have a lot of babies here that always wake up up until they're 3, and they just wake up. They want, a sippy cup sometimes, or, they just have trouble falling asleep. Sometimes the parents are not sleeping at all at night, which is going to affect the family dynamics even more. If the parents aren't sleeping, they're going to be on edge a little bit more. So that's important information, not only for the child, but also for the family dynamics. And then I always, if they kind of say something, I always say, well, tell me a little bit more about that, just to kind of coax the parents into giving me a little bit more information. And then once he's up, I'll say, you said you eat breakfast, how does he let you know when he's hungry? What about what he wants to eat? How does he let them know that? What does it usually look like when he eats? So I'm really looking to see like where he sits, what kind of foods he eats. Is he a picky eater? Does he stuff his food? What about when he spoon feeds? If, they're old enough to do that, are they able to get it in their mouth? So let's do a little bit of practice. So think of some other routines that you would want to know about a child around 24 months of age, we'll say. So what kind of questions would you ask centered around that routine? And I gave you the example of mealtime. So think of some other things, whether it's playtime, it's, when they're going outside, if they're getting in the car, whether or not they're brushing their teeth. Just think of some of those kind of questions, and just take a minute and type some in the chat box. So Lynette said, how does child respond when they're separated from you? Yep. And that's a really good question. And so I always like to give the parents some kind of context. And so I tell them to think of some examples. So whether they're dropping them off at daycare, whether grandma's coming to watch them, just because it gives you a little bit of a better idea. And a lot of times parents, I feel like they need cues. They can't always think of things off the top of their head. Like if you ask them some open-ended questions sometimes, and it's kind of like when you take your child to the doctor and you're like, I need to tell the doctor this and this and this and this, but you get to the doctor and you forget to tell them everything. And so I kind of think of, going about the child's day in that way to make sure we're asking for cues. Janelle said she always asks about anxiety levels, how they interact when other children are around, if they have difficulty with different textures like food, clothing, toys. Yep, that's really important. When we're asking some of those gross motor questions, I always like to ask, how does your child, move around their home? What about outside? Do they ever take their shoes off? And so you can really tell whether or not even they have a problem going on the grass, or they have a problem transitioning from different things like the curb to the grass or the sidewalk. How does he or she tell you they need to go to the bathroom? Are they potty trained? Yep, that's a really important one too. Or are they showing any signs that they're ready to go to the potty? And really just, looking at their age and, seeing, I know for us, we don't focus as much on potty training here just because typically most of the kids that we see in early intervention aren't always ready for it, but a lot of the parents want it. And so we do a lot of educating the parents of looking for signs when the child's ready. Angie said, do they like painting, coloring? Do they like music and dancing? Yeah, all of that is really, really important. Especially like one way to capture coloring, because a lot of parents will say, no, I don't let my child color. And so I'll ask them, what about when you guys go out to eat to restaurants? Do they ever get one of those kids' coloring books? What do they do with it? What happens? What does it look like? How are they holding it? And sometimes parents don't always know the questions, but when we ask those questions, they start looking for those things later on. And so it really sets up for a successful intervention too, because then they start to become more observant. So we're teaching parents to become observant. Do they like music, dancing? And so music, dancing is huge, right? Nursery rhymes, generally all the protocols always ask about nursery rhymes. How are they responding? Are they starting to use hand gestures? Are they starting to sing parts of the songs? Are they humming to the songs? And I always will ask, because a lot of times I've noticed, parents aren't always doing nursery rhymes. So I'll ask about TV, because TV is still huge. And, I know there's a huge thing about TV, but it's something that parents do. It's part of their natural environment, and we can educate on it if it's too much. But, I'll say, do they have a favorite TV show? And, they might say, oh, they love Mickey Mouse. Okay, so what happens when, the hot dog song comes on, or the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse song comes on? What do they do? And what does that look like? And sometimes they'll even say, oh, yeah, I have a video, and they'll pull out the video. So it's a great time for us to have a chance to observe the child through a video. But I love technology, and I love using videos if parents have them. Great discussion and great ideas. And so here's some other questions that are really relevant to kids this age. Again, tell me about your day. What happens on the weekends? You get a lot of working parents that they're going to say, that they just don't know during the weekday because it goes by so fast. And so generally we know that they're going to spend most of their time on the weekend. So finding out that information is important. Excuse me. Where do you and your child spend time? So how are the parents spending time with their kids? What do they do when they're not running around? What do you do on a regular basis with your child? Do you go to the store, take baths, meals, walk a dog, pick a sibling up from the school bus? What kind of things are they doing every day with them? And that really helps us find out where we can help intervene in some of those routines. What makes your child happy, laugh, and or smile? That's probably one of my favorite questions to ask parents, and I would almost always ask it for every single parent. I think it kind of relieves some of their tension, because then they're thinking about their happy child, and then that makes them feel happy too, like thinking about those moments. And I think, that's a really great place to get parents, especially when we're doing an assessment, just to kind of make them know that, we're really looking for those strengths too in your child and what they're doing. What holds your child's attention? So we definitely know that at this age, attention always seems to be something that we need to look at, whether they have a few seconds or a few minutes of attention. What is it that, is it appropriate that they're sitting there on the iPad for an hour, or is it appropriate that they're, they will sit and interact with the parents and doing an adult-directed activity? So that's really important information. What routines does your child not like? What do they do? Bath time. I always like to ask about bath time too, because most kids love bath time, but then there are some kids that hate it. So what do they do? What do the parents do? And you really want to find out, what are the parents doing because their child doesn't like it? And so digging a little bit deeper. Who are key people in your child's life that they spend time with? So that might be the grandparents, it might be a aunt or an uncle, and where do they go? Might be friends too of parents. What places do you visit frequently, like the mall, grandparents' house, doctors, and just finding out how the child reacts when they're going to those places. What activities would you like to try? What is difficult routine for you? And how would you like it to look differently? So really finding out where the parent's concern is. Okay. So isolated skills. So we're going to just briefly kind of talk about that. And isolated skills. So that's kind of like when we're looking at like pointing, for example. So we really want to look at, what is that skill telling us, and how is that skill functional? And so, so pointing, we know that if a child's pointing and gesturing us, that's also showing us what's important to the child in their world. So what are they pointing at? We want to know as well. It's not always, I think a lot of people think of pointing, is your child pointing? And they kind of start to think now that that's a sign of autism if they're not pointing right away. But pointing has so many benefits. And so we really want to, find out a little bit more about pointing, not just asking them, is your child pointing? And other examples are stacking Blocks, that's a huge one on a test, stacking 3 to 4 blocks. And for that, it's really showing us how a child pays attention, how they can combine objects and balance them, how they can imitate a task, if they're able to follow directions, if they can play in a vertical plane going up, and grasp the blocks using fingers. So it kind of gives us a better idea of that. Even stirring a spoon with a cup, that's another test item. And so again, we're looking at the attention piece, combining 2 objects together to imitate, following directions, understanding the spatial relationship involved with putting the spoon in the cup and the grasp, the spoon and the cup handle together. So how they're using their hands and using both hands together. Imitating animal sounds. So this is really going to help show us the child's oral motor coordination, his ability to attend and imitate speech sounds of others. Sorry, my voice keeps going out. Making marks on paper. And so this is looking at the grasp. How is the child using his grasp now? His ability, again, to attend, to imitate the actions of another. Using the crayon with the paper, and that's really showing us their pre-writing skills. And even the pressure, the amount of pressure that the child's using is important to leave a mark. Standing on 1 foot, so that's showing us the child's balance, his motor coordination, attention, ability to imitate, how they're motor planning when they see somebody else doing something. So really taking a look at the isolated skills and kind of, identifying what that skill is really showing us for each child, and what is it that it's telling us and what it means to the child. So I'm going to briefly talk about assessing babies, and then we're going to talk about assessing older kids. I think assessing babies, people always have the hardest time with, probably because we tend to assess older children and not as many younger ones. And some of the handouts that you're going to get from me, and again, if you don't have access to Moodle on fielding and you need me to email you the handouts, please type your email address in the chat box and I will make sure I get that to you. Or you can email me and I'll make sure you get it. But I'm going to give you some of the tools for the ELAP, for the Early Learning Accomplishment Profile. That kind of gives you the different scenarios. And so one of them is a handout, birth to 15 months. And it gives you a great order of a sequence of how to administer that test. So with babies, we want to look at their vision. Are they tracking faces? Are they more interested in toys? You'll see the younger babies are always more interested in faces. And then as they get older, it's toys. So if you have an older baby that's still only interested in faces, and you know that there's a developmental delay. In hearing, we want to look at their hearing too, making sure they're turning to sounds on both sides. As they get older, responding to their name. If they're on any medication. So why is that important to us, especially with reflux? You guys have any idea? If you want to type in the chat, or you can jump in on video and talk about it, but why would meds be important and reflux be important for a baby? And Chelsea, and I go to, or Adji, I got both of you guys, so I will make sure I send it to you. And if you guys did it before, if you could make sure that you write where you're from and how you heard about the conference too as well down, that'd be great. Okay. So, meds. So there's a lot of babies that are on some seizure meds sometimes, and that can really severely impact their development. Janelle said they're usually lethargic and slow to respond on meds. And I have a great example of a child that I used to see, and he was probably maybe about 9 months old when I went out there. He was on seizure meds. He wasn't rolling. He wasn't, moving at all. He would only use his hands to learn. And so every time I would put like a rattle or anything in his hand, That's the only way he would, touch it and feel it. And so the first thing we did right away was make sure that he got his vision tested, and he ended up needing glasses. And then the second thing was we really looked at the meds too and made sure that they had a good discussion with their doctor. And as soon as he got off those meds, he was a different kid. And so he started to roll immediately. He started to engage more, smile. And so meds are really important to really make sure we're looking at that. And reflex is really important. A lot of kids have reflex, especially a lot of kids with motor delays. And you'll notice that the movements are really off because they're not as motivated to move because it hurts them and it causes them a lot of pain. So reflex is really important to make sure that the pediatrician's addressing if there's an issue. Then we're going to look at their grasp and their reflexes, how they're exploring. So are they mouthing things? Are they mouthing their toys or their toes? Arms out if they're not bringing them together. This is seen a lot in preemies because they keep their arms out when they're in the NICU. They don't have tummy time at all, and so they're really slow to get their arms back in together. So that's one of the things that we work on a lot. Feeding, if they're on the breast or bottle, formula, baby food, that's really important. So that's what we're looking for when we're talking about feeding. And hands together. So are they, starting to grasp at their bottle? Are their hands open, closed? Will they start to do any kind of patty cake, wheels on the bus? And sleeps, again, sleep is really important. A lot of children in the NICU, they sleep through the night and they're not always held. And so want to make sure that we're looking at that as well. And making sure, seeing how they're getting their needs met, how, and this is really important where you're looking at parent responsiveness and parent attachment. We assessed twins the other day, and when the speech therapist was holding the child, you could tell like the baby was really tense. And so I was like, okay, let's go ahead and transition and give dad the baby to hold. And as soon as the baby went to dad, her whole body just really relaxed. And so that just told us so much just about her attachment and how dad was a really great calming force for her, because it just made her feel calm being in dad's arms. So she knew right away. So she could tell the difference between obviously strangers and dad. And then we're going to look at assessing older kids. And so you guys, if you have any questions at all, just feel free to type them in the chat box and I'll make sure I talk about it. Assessing older kids. So we're looking at their use of hands. We want to make sure that they're crossing midline. We know that making sure that they're doing tasks like that are very important. It tells us a lot about their brain development. We want to see how they're exploring their environment, how they're walking, running. If they're walking already and they're running around, do they fall frequently? How are they participating in their care? So that's a lot of that independence. As kids get older, we want them to become a little bit more independent, but they also want to become independent. So how are they showing us that? Sleep is always important, especially for children with developmental delays. So we really should look at sleep, making sure that they're getting a good amount of sleep and also going into a deep sleep. If you guys, it looks like, Angie, you're at a Head Start preschool. So if you are at a preschool and you hear a lot of those kids snoring, that's a good sign of sleep apnea. And if you see behavior issues along with that, then there's a chance they might not be getting a good amount of sleep because they're not going into that deep sleep, and you need to hit that in order to really process all the information that you've learned throughout the day. And so sleep is important. Ability to think, imitate, and remember. So how are they looking, thinking, and remembering? Expressive and receptive language, obviously. Their socialization skills with others, with their peers. And then, again, you're going to get that handout for 15 to 36 months. And there's also an assessment for service planning example that you guys will get. Okay, so I'm going to show you this quick video. It might be about 5 minutes, but let me see. Okay. And this is just a video that is asking questions. One person's the service coordinator, so it's the person that's going to see the family first. But I really like the way that they're asking the questions to the parent and how they're making sure that they heard the parent correctly. So we'll go ahead and turn this one on.
Hi, Richard. It's good to see you.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for making time to meet with me today.
Sure, no problem.
I see little Ricky snoozing away there in his seat.
Yes, yeah. His nap time's about over though, so he'll be waking up here in just a few minutes.
Good. I look forward to that. Well, as we talked about a little bit earlier, I really would like to just ask you some questions to get to know a little bit more about you and your family.
Okay.
So let's just start with what typical days look like for you and little Ricky and your wife.
Okay, let's see. Typical day. I mean, they're all pretty much the same. I mean, the kind of rundown is he'll wake up about between 7 and 7:30.
Okay.
He typically is ready to eat his breakfast then, which is kind of a long process. So I try to get his breakfast stuff together before he wakes up, and then I still have to feed him because he really can't use his arms and his hands to feed himself. And it's a pretty messy process. Gets a lot of food all over him, all over me, all over anything around us. But he likes to eat, so that's a good thing.
Okay, good.
So we go through that process.
Can I ask you a question? You said it takes a long time. How long about does that take?
Oh, at least 30 minutes, sometimes more.
Okay, thanks.
After I get him cleaned up, then we'll play a little bit, and I'll do some chores around the house, and then time to start getting his food ready for lunch, getting his lunch to him. And then after lunch, he's pretty much ready to go down for a nap. So he'll take a nap for part of the afternoon while I work on the computer or do other things around the house. Then when my wife gets home, we fix dinner together. We have our meal, and then she'll usually play with him for a while. And then it's time to get him his bath, which is a whole other story. That's a nightmare too.
Oh, a nightmare. Okay. So what are some of the issues related to that?
Well, he stiffens up even more when we get him into the bathtub, and he can't really sit up, so we have to try to hold him. So his head won't go underwater.
Oh gosh, right.
But he's slick, so that's really hard to deal with. And so, my wife and I just kind of draw straws on who's thinking of that.
Okay, and he's unhappy.
Oh, he's unhappy.
Okay.
We're unhappy. It's just a mess.
Okay, all right. Well, that's really informative. How are the weekends different from the weekdays when your wife's home?
Well, I'd say that's a time when we get a lot of our errands run.
Okay.
And so either she'll stay home with him, and then I'll go to the grocery store, out and do what we need to do, or she'll go on her way home from work. So we just kind of tag team.
Okay. Well, what are community outings like for the three of you?
Well, we don't all go together.
Oh, okay.
She'll stay home with him, and I'll go, or vice versa.
Okay. Well, is that something that you'd be interested in changing, or is that working out for you guys?
We might be interested in changing that. I mean, it would be good if there was a time when we all could go together, but it's just such a struggle getting him into the car seat, and then what do we do with him when we're at the store, and then he starts getting upset. It's just easier if one of us stays home.
Okay. Another piece of information is really about what little Ricky likes to do. So some of his favorite things. So you mentioned a couple of playtimes that happen regularly. What are his favorite things to do during that time?
Well, he really likes to play with the new puppy.
The puppy. Okay.
We'll play like we're throwing the ball to him. He needs a lot of help trying to throw the ball, but I'll put it in his hand, and we'll toss it over there together. And I think he seems to like it when we read books to him at night before he goes to take his nap.
Okay.
He likes to eat.
Okay. What about toys? Does he have any favorite toys besides the ball?
Just a ball, and he kind of likes his cars and trucks.
Okay.
We probably play like we're pushing him around.
Okay. All right. That's very helpful. Well, you've described several areas, I think, that we might be able to certainly gather more information and provide some support. So let me just tell you what I heard from that meal time, we could use some support there, bath time, definitely, and then possibly the notion of community outings as a family, that you guys might be able to do some things there. the next step is really more eyes-on assessment.
Okay.
So where we would actually take a look and see how little Ricky's doing, what his participation looks like. Of those areas, what would be your preference?
Oh, let's see, because they're all really important. But,
Sure.
maybe the meal time, because it
Okay.
happens a lot. It happens several times
I
a
was
day.
thinking the same
It's a
thing.
big mess. So how about we start there?
Okay, and just to clarify, we'll take a look at all of those areas,
Okay.
but as we're getting ready to write that IFSP, because of the timelines,
Yeah.
I agree. I think mealtime is a great place to start.
Okay.
On our team, Christina, our occupational therapist, is really our expert on
Okay.
feeding and eating.
Good.
So how about I share with her some of this information, and either I'll call you or she'll call you to set up the assessment.
Okay. That sounds great.
Okay.
Okay. So what did you like or didn't like about that video? That was Dathan and Melissa Sheldon. And they have a book called the Early Childhood Coaching Handbook. And it's a great model, probably professionally and personally. It's just the way that you interact with other people. And so you use more of a coaching interaction style with families, but you always come up with some kind of joint plan. And so they're really knowledgeable. They've done some research in the field. So if that's something you're interested in checking out, I just wanted to go ahead and mention that. Okay. But that video, what I really like about it is how she kind of summarizes everything up at the end to make sure that she hit all the concerns. I think that's a really important thing, whether, you're working in early intervention or not, however you're coming across the parents, just making sure that you are kind of gathering that information too and asking them. It's a great conversation starter, but it's also a great view of the child's world and how we can help intervene, better using more of those family-centered practices. Okay, so what do we know is important for children 0 to 5 years old? So go ahead and type, your response in the chat box, just kind of what is really important for this age already. Why focus so much on this age? Predictable environments, play. Yep. So children 0 to 5, they definitely have some predictable environments. We know what they like, what they don't like. They definitely need the structure and that routine to be given to them. Play is really important. And so we really need to look at, how those parents are also playing with the children too, and who they're playing with, their friends, their peers, their siblings. They need secure, stable relationships. Yes, that's really important. And social skills and trust and schedules. Yeah, me and Janelle, who's also on this phone conference, we're taking an infant mental health class with Fielding right now. And it's a great class because it looks at just early on those relationships and why they're so important. And I think a lot of times when we're assessing children, we miss that piece. We miss how important and how valuable that relationship is, and how many of those opportunities the children are given to even learn or play throughout the day. And Angie said movement. Yep, movement's really important as well. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the phrase container babies, but that's something where they say that now, because we have all of these great contraptions to put the kids in, that we really just put them in, we put them in the high chair, we put them in the car seat, we put them in the swing, the bumbo, the bouncer. And so they sit and they don't get to move, which means they don't get as many sensory experiences. They're not touching as much. They don't get that bond. And so that's a great one to look at too. That's really important. Maternal mental health. Yes, that's really important as well, especially, just how the parents are managing having a young child. Having a young child is very difficult, you know, and so how are they managing their stress too, whether it's after birth or whether their child's 4. It can be very difficult. I know I have 5 kids of my own. 3 of them are older. I have a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 12-year-old, but then I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And I can say that, you know, I'm one of those parents that dreads taking my kids out to the store sometimes, the younger ones anyway. So, so really finding out how the parents are dealing and handling that. Because it's important. You know, I know that we all do this line of work, and, you know, it's something that we love to do. And, but it's so easy to kind of, you know, forget about all of that when you are in the moment and when you're stressed, and there's all these other factors and these other priorities in your life. And so I know, like, this is what I do for a living, but how great would it be to have somebody come in like once a month just to say, you know, here's something that would be, you could really incorporate into your life. I just, you know, you have that accountability piece. So that mental health piece is really important. Angie also said it's so important at this age, early intervention, but everyone here knows this. Yes, it is, Angie. And I am such a lover of early intervention. And this is the whole reason I decided to come to Fielding, because there's not as much research in early intervention as I would like to see. But we all know that it does, you know, it helps so much and the benefits are there. And, you know, just trying to get that return on investment cost for stakeholders in our community, that can be very difficult to get community members to pay attention and to make sure that they're putting that emphasis and that early value into these kids in our communities. So yes, I agree. Okay, so we're just going to look at some of the evidence-based practices in the research. One, this is more centered around early intervention, but family-centered practices, they're really huge. And that's just a combination of beliefs and practices that are going to define particular ways of working with families that are consumer-driven and competency enhancing. And so we're not just focused on our own needs. We want to make sure that it's also what the families want. That's something important to the families, because if, you know, the doctor came in and told me that, you know, you should really go run, you know, 20 minutes a day, but it wasn't something that was important to me and I just felt like I was fine, I'm not going to do it. So we really want to make sure that whatever we're addressing, that it's really important to the family. But it's also competency enhancing. So we want to make sure that, you know, we are our own experts, and then the parents are their own experts of their child. So we want to also use our knowledge to enhance the parents' knowledge and their abilities as well. And so that's really important, because the parents are the ones that are with the kids the most. They're the ones that know their child. And so we want to teach them what we know. And that was one of the main reasons that I even started my website. I was like, gosh, I know all this knowledge. And, you know, I feel like there's just so much that parents don't always know. And so it's just a great way for me to make sure that we're sharing that information. And so we're really going to make sure that we're not looking at those concerns that are just our concerns, or if there are concerns, we need to educate about the parents to make sure that there are concerns for them as well. And that's what's going to drive our assessment process. And if you guys know anything about early intervention, we don't write anything on the IFSP without the family's permission. So that was a great study. In early intervention, so we also know that family-centered practices, practitioners use their knowledge, and they post to families the decisions about the objectives to achieve. But you really look at those families as equal partners and collaborators. So we're getting that support to enhance a child's development. So we want to make sure that those families are part of our team and that we're sharing in their successes as much as they share in their successes during our intervention with them. And we want to make sure that it's individualized, it's flexible and responsive to each child and the family's needs. So we know that, you know, things change quickly. Children from this age, from 0 to 5, they change so rapidly. So we want to make sure that, we're responsive to that and we're willing to also change. We're going to use relational practices and participative practices. Really, our goal is, to make sure that that child's participating in those activities that are around them, especially as they grow and they get older. Parents share their experiences. So this was a study from Beginning Goldman, Buchanan, and all those other people on there that you can read. But they shared the experiences by parents. They looked at, what parents thought of early intervention. And I just thought this was a really neat study. And, and it really showed that we have family-centered practices and reflective practices in early intervention. So what that means is we're really getting the parents to kind of self-reflect about the practices that they're doing at home. And so you'll hear that a lot more now, because the more that you reflect on your own and you're more mindful about things, the more aware you are, the more you're going to change your practices, or you'll be, if you're working with your child and that yelling at your child doesn't always work, you might, kind of stop and be a little bit more mindful. Okay, I know I need to take a step back myself before I can address what's going on with my child and helping them. Or I know that, Johnny's really just frustrated because he can't, tell me what he wants. And so I'll be a little bit more understanding of that. Parents also shared they had effective communication, that it should occur throughout the whole process. It really helped parents cope to focus on the priorities, especially those parents that had a lot of children with severe delays. It's overwhelming because they have so many doctor's appointments, specialists that they have to see. And it's just a lot if they're doing multiple things. So really looking at what's the priority? What should we work on first? Where do we start? So really focusing on that helped them to cope. They experience their own learning processes to reflect and pay attention to their child. And so the parents themselves, their parents themselves are learning, and they're starting to notice. Remember how I said, like when you are asking parents some of those questions, they start after that to pay attention. So they start noticing things. So parents really do listen. And experienced professionals may want to re-examine their current consultation practices and pay attention to the following: the activities they do with parents and children, their previous knowledge or background with strategies, therapies, or programs offered, or the professional language used. And I think that's really because, the way people were taught, 20 or 30 years ago has really changed over the years as parents are becoming more involved, and we know that's important. And so just really making sure that we're looking and we're incorporating those practices. Routines-based interview. So I don't really do Williams routines-based interview to the T. I kind of do my own version of it here. And it's just asking questions. It's just learning how to interview and ask questions that are important to that family and listen. But you got to look at the functionality. So we're focusing on, the skills in all those different settings. So the home and the community. And it's really important to make sure that we're addressing the community too, even whether or not the parents are getting out into the community. There's some parents that I've seen and they're like, oh no, I don't ever take my child out. Like I would never do that. And so, that tells us one, that child's probably needs to get out because they're not getting those sensory experiences. And two, the parent probably needs that as well in order to really have a good mindset, positive mindset, and feel good about themselves when you're trapped inside all day. It's not always fun. Or feeling like you are. So this leads to more functional goals and objectives. And when early childhood interventionists are trained to interview families about the details of their lives, 3 things can happen. And I thought this was really nice. Families, by and large, like having someone knowledgeable to show interest in the details about their parenting. In the course of talking about their daily lives, family disclose much more information about the family life beyond simply what the child does. And I've seen that a lot, especially a service coordinator who might not be as trained in it, can go into a home and say, gosh, I couldn't get anything out of this parent. But because we know that we're trained in this, we go in and they're so surprised by how much the parent really starts talking to us and giving us all this information. And it's just really the way we do it, using those open-ended questions and, not giving them always those yes or no questions. And early childhood interventionists have the opportunity to become conscious of the effect of the environment on the child and family functioning. So I think that's important, just all of us as providers, to really look into that and also self-reflect ourselves when we're addressing things. So why is it important? So we definitely always want to create a learning environment. And I think that's it's important for us because we're not perfect and we don't expect anybody to be, but, we want to make sure that we're always learning and growing. We learn from each other. And so, coming to your peers and asking and your colleagues to ask them questions, or if you need, you need help or problem solving, or, using their knowledge that they have. So I would probably say my weakest area is probably physical therapy. And so I might go to a physical therapist a lot more to ask some of those questions. And it's probably because that's probably my weakest area, because I generally worked with more occupational therapists and speech therapists, and I'm an educator. And so working with them more, they already gave me that knowledge. So just because I haven't worked with as many physical therapists, I've just lacked some of that knowledge. But just being aware of where your weaknesses are and where you can learn and who to go to learn different things. Striving for perfection. Again, we're not always perfect, but, we definitely want to make sure that we're always headed, positively in the right way, not taking steps back. So why is early intervention different than other types of therapy? I like to always try to think about this because early intervention really focuses on the family dynamics versus other therapy where you take a child there and they're just getting 30 minutes or 60 minutes in a clinical setting. And so they're just working strictly with the child. But I always wonder, how much are you missing? How much of the other picture are you missing? Because you don't know that if you're working on motor because the child's not walking yet, but do you know that the parents always carry them from one place to the other? Do you know that in their house that there's no walking space for the child to practice, or there might be just an open floor plan, so they don't have any couches or tables close by, coffee tables, to kind of try to practice going closer and having more successes to start walking on their own. Every child also possesses unique characteristics, and this is so true. And I can definitely say that as a mother of 5 children, that each of my children are different in their own aspect. And then even the family dynamics, it's different when you're relating to different, to each child. And so we want to look at that because, each child has a different personality. And every family, they can teach us something. I always go in with the mindset of, what can I learn from this family? What can they teach me? And it's just amazing the stuff that you learn, and you kind of have your own self-reflection of it. And children develop in a unique way, depending on the child's personality, environment, and experiences. So we want to look and focus on the family's priorities, concerns, and resources throughout the process. So you really need to make sure that they're individualized, because that will help if we know what the priorities are and what the concerns are. So I always find out first, what are the family's concerns? Generally, families are like, I'm concerned about the child's language. And the reason for that is because language is the most obvious thing to parents. Like Johnny's not talking at all. And so, when you talk to the parents, you really got to educate them a little bit, Johnny's not talking at all, but from, my view, Johnny's running around and can't sit and attend, and he's not listening to half the things you say because he's not turning to your voice. And so, so then they might say, okay, you're right. That's another one of my concerns, is that he's, he can't sit at all. He can't He just likes to be from one place to the other. And so he really doesn't have the opportunity to look at mom and get those nonverbal cues or gestures that she's showing him at all. And then breaking it down to the priorities. And then figuring out what their resources are. What do they already have available to them? So make sure it relates to the outcomes and identifying the learning opportunities. And I'm so big about learning opportunities with parents. I always say, I'm here to help you to enhance your learning opportunities. And I explain how children need, thousands of different learning opportunities. And they might have to practice signing more, like 1,000 times before they really get it, and it's really the same with all learning, even adult learning. It's like you have to practice it so much to really feel comfortable and confident in it. So we're going to do a quick quiz. So just type your answer in the chat. Just type yes or no. So in the interest of time, it's important to begin assessment as soon as possible after arriving to the family's home. When it says no, false, no, and you're right, it's no. All right, oops, I gave the other answer. Begin the assessment with easier items so that the child feels successful. So I already gave you that answer, that was yes. So you always want to start with things to build the child's confidence up first. Parents should mainly be quiet observers during the assessment, yes or no? No, no, and the answer is no. Okay, the next one. Instead of having everyone engage the child, one professional team member should act as the assessment facilitator and conduct the play-based items with the child. And the answer is yes. And that's just, making sure everybody has clear roles when they're doing the assessment. From reporting assessment as results, be sure to list the skills from the assessment the child was able to do and those he missed. And that is no. And so the reason for that is because we're looking at the function. So we're not going to say, he was able to stack 3 blocks today. He was not able to trace a line. What we're going to really report out is, we know that that Johnny really likes to sit down and play with his Legos. He likes to stack them up 10 high. So things that we've visually seen within the child's favorite routines, their activities, and you guys will have a handout too to give you a good idea of that. So bringing it all together, I'm going to kind of rely on the OSEP child outcomes because that's what we use, and that is the positive social emotional skills, so that includes the relationships, the acquisition and use of knowledge of skills, so that's including early language, communication, and use of appropriate behaviors to meet needs. There's a video, but I'm not going to show it just for the purpose of time, but I wanted to include the link for you guys on there. So feel free to go look at that. So when we're reporting out, we want to make sure that we assume that parents always have questions and explain what we're looking for and the reasoning why. So just making sure that it's clear to them. One example I can give is we always ask parents, is your child labeling anything? Which is a terrible question because one, it's a yes or no question, but two, because parents may or may not really know what labeling truly means. I had one parent ask me on the Ages and Stages questionnaire that they weren't sure what to count as words because they thought if they only said like a part of the word, like ba for ball, that they shouldn't include it. And so, we had to explain to the parent that it's as long as they're always using it with the same intention of calling it a ball, then it's appropriate. And so, it's just really talking to the parents and never assuming that they know something is always better. And leaving the evaluation with something parents can do as a joint plan while they wait for services to start gives them feelings of hope and sets them up for the initial session. So, the processes of getting services started takes a really long time. So just making sure that we're giving them some of that feedback and explaining it to them, but starting with the child's strengths and then what might be coming next for the child. And so then when we look at our goals, for me, and I'm not really going to go too much into the goals, but I just wanted to give you this information on the slide. But when we talk about the outcomes, we should be looking at what functional skill, what routine or activity it can be embedded in, and how is it measured. So I always tell families there are 3 things that we're going to do for outcomes. We want to see what skill, we want to embed it in some kind of routine or activity so it gives you the opportunity to practice, and measurability. So how do we know that it wasn't a one-time thing, that child indeed did it? So we might ask what would you like to see, and what would that look like? And we want to make sure that outcome is going to make a difference. Again, we're not going to do this part, but I just wanted to go ahead and give you the opportunity to practice, and you guys can take this back and practice back at your site too, but just kind of practicing different outcomes and how to write those goals, and keeping in mind with the 3 things that we're looking for: the skill, the routine activity, and the measurability, what that would look like. And I just threw an example of an IFSP up here. And so you can see right here, we have the daily activities routines. This is a medical information, the family's concerns, their resources, and their priorities. And so that gives you a good understanding of it, of what we're looking for. And so this is kind of their response back, their feedback back in the 3 OSEP indicators. And it gives you like a better idea. I might say at school, he loves to dress up like a fireman, play in the sandbox with cars, and help with sweeping floors after lunchtime. He can get possessive of things and will get upset when another child picks up the fireman hat. So I would read through it. I don't think it's perfect because, again, we're not ever perfect, so we're going to learn it from it. But, I would want to know, well, what does he say when he has those, tantrums? So it says that he's hitting, but does he use any words? From an outsider reading it, you don't always know. So that's just a good example for you guys to look at. And here's some example of outcomes. And so they said here, he will use 10 words to request a snack or toy, such as, and I always like giving examples of what's meaningful to the child, and then each day for 1 week. So we know that if he does that 10 times each day for a week, that it's measured. And then the services to address it. And here they suggested developmental services. So it's really important that we get a good knowledge of child development in all areas of development, and good interview skills working with families. I think both are important. And it's funny because we all go to school and we learn about our own discipline. And so it's really hard to learn about other things because school doesn't always teach you like that multiple way of learning, which, that's the good thing about fielding, I will say. And so I encourage you to, make sure that you're getting that professional growth and that you're learning from other people and asking questions. I tend to invite people here all the time just to get them to talk about their profession and what they're passionate about, just so we can all learn from it. Oops. And nature and nurture. So we're going to help build learning opportunities for families. So really creating those learning opportunities. Lifelong learning for us and those that we encounter. So again, just learning is really important. These were some tips from the field. They like to give parents handouts at the assessment. They like to explain development to families. One great way to explain it is how, parents always want speech therapy first, but some children aren't quite ready for speech therapy. because they don't have the cognitive ability, or they don't have the attention and focus, or they don't have, they haven't even started walking yet. And so we need to work on their motor first. And so just really talking about the foundational aspects of development and thinking of it like a pyramid. Telling families what we're doing and why, giving tips and feedback, asking if they have videos. Again, videos can really show us a lot. Observation is critical. If it's feeding, try to watch them eat something. So if they have a feeding concern, I'm like, oh, do you mind bringing out a snack for Johnny so we can watch him eat? Asking questions to gather rich information. Talking about your day, what sounds do they hear, routines, does the child laugh, what does the family like to do in the child, and capturing in the IFSP and incorporating real things in the narrative. So I think always when you can say such as this, or for example, when this happened, that means you probably got a really good narrative. So no assessment will be perfect, but why do we do it? What does it mean to the family? Remember, this is a big deal to the family. And it's funny, I went to a training before and they said that some of these families will keep this in their baby book forever. And that really struck to me, because I was like, you know what, they're right, because they'll really, whatever plan we create for them, they're going to hold on to that. So that's important to remember. And it really sets the tone for future visits. Be flexible, and individualization is key. So remember, we're going to individualize. So we're going to go to reflection. So what kind of changes could you guys see making in your own practice? So go ahead and type in the box. And there's resources and references on here, but I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. But go ahead and type what changes you could see making in your own practice. And Angie said better questions for families. Yeah, that's a huge one, really. I think if anything, we talk about assessment a lot, and I'm always like, it's always about those questions, because that's probably the most beneficial information you can get. It's rich, it's good quality services that you can provide based off that information. And if you guys have any questions, go ahead and type them in the box too. Lynette said, I do developmental screenings for families who are part of the child welfare system. And so I really focus on the experienced trauma. So moving forward, thinking about how to slow down and really ask more everyday routines. Yeah, that's really important, Lynette. And it's funny because when you work, I used to work with at-risk families for a really long time. And so we always saw too, just families' priorities. So like if you're trying to reunite families back to with their child in those CPS cases, that you'll find that sometimes the child isn't always a priority. Sometimes the priority is just finding a place to live or finding transportation. That's like the number one thing in those families' mind. And so that stresses them out so much that, it's sad when trauma occurs, but really figuring it out, and they're going to go back to their house, especially making sure that we're going to address those and educate the parents. Aggie, I don't know, am I saying your name right, Aggie or Aggie? Said, I enjoyed the way you broke down the numerous skills one can look for when a child's engaged in one particular activity, like building blocks. Yeah, that's really hard for a lot of people. Lynette said, right, so balancing the family's basic needs with the needs of the developing childcare can be tricky, and a skill that evolves every day. Yeah, it's really hard. And, there's one handout. So these are all the handouts that you guys are going to get in your email. So again, if you did not get the handouts, please give me your email and I'll make sure you get them. But there's just a lot of different handouts that you'll get. And one of them, and I don't know how well you guys can see this, but one of them is what do we report out in each area. So I broke it down into the indicators to kind of give you a better idea of what we look for. And it's kind of overwhelming when you read it because there's just so much, you know, centered around a child. So it's good to keep that in mind, but you never know, you know, what information you can find out. And how can we assess personality? So when I'm looking at a child's personality, I'm really looking at, you know, how I'm looking at their play skills too, because I think that's important. So you need to look at their play skills. You need to look at how they interact with the parents, because I think it's going to tell you, one, whether they have some of those like obsessive compulsive tendencies, or if they seem like a really laid back, happy child, especially with babies, you can definitely tell if they're always happy, they're smiling, they tend to go to anybody, versus, you know, a child who is a little bit more shy and they, you know, they tense up more and they cry when they go to other people. And so that's really, that's how I generally assess personality. I don't know if anybody else has any other ideas, but that's what I look for. And then the older kids, I think, you know, just that interaction piece is really important with the parents. And then, you know, when a peer tries to interrupt their play, I think that tells us a lot about their personality as well. Great question. Any other questions? Thank you. That's all I have. But if you guys have any questions, if you need anything, feel free to contact me at any time. Feel free to visit my website, empowerfoundations.com. If you just have questions about fielding, I know some of you guys were interested in fielding, feel free to email me and ask me anything you'd like about that as well. I'm really open to helping you guys however possible. And I will make sure that I get the handouts to everybody that listed their email address on there. But thank you, everyone, for joining me. I had a great time, and hopefully you guys learned a lot. Have a good day.